This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue. French President Emmanuel Macron and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen are in China this week for talks with Chinese leaders during a three-day trip. Despite differences, there has been a rise in diplomatic activity between Chinese and European leaders recently. What are the core issues of these meetings, and what more can we make of these recent high-level talks? To discuss these issues and more, I'm glad to be joined by Feng Zhongping, Director of the Institute of European Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Harvey Dzodin, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Carl Fei, Professor of the BI Norwegian Business School. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the discussion. Zhongping, I will start with you. So we are going to see important engagement between the Chinese leaders and the European leaders. So what to watch?
Okay, I think the President of France has taken this trip, and the Commission President, you are right, altogether. I think they both have taken this trip quite seriously. Not only because this is the first in 3 years. Don't forget the COVID affection. But also there are very important issues between Chinese leaders and European leaders. I think the President of France and the Commission President von der Leyen, they both would like very much to talk with Chinese leaders on two issues, especially. Number one, how to overcome this Ukraine crisis. I think, Europe is the direct victim of this ongoing conflict. And we couldn't say the end of this, people have feel hopeless about this. And so this is probably the priority for European leaders, particularly the French president. He expressed, many times he wants to say this quick end of this crisis. He has done a lot of homework before his departure, to China. He made a phone call to Ukraine president, and he made a phone call just hours before his trip to China with Joe Biden, the U.S. president. He talked about, the Ukraine crisis. And the second thing, I think, in his mind, or in both of them's mind, is economic issues, trade, cooperations. China, Europe are two biggest economies in the world. Let's have to be realistic about this. So if we want to have a post-pandemic recovery to overcome this Ukraine crisis difficulties, the two sides, the two economies need to have a constant discussions.
The Ukraine crisis is a priority for the European leaders, but at the same time, we see the French delegation. There are 50 to 60, business executives along with the president, President Macron. So we can say, I would say European side is also paying close attention to investment and trade between the two sides.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is all about business as well as the other issues that were already discussed. So these leaders that are coming are not just coming to make theoretical proposals. They've probably been working on bilateral issues and business deals for a long time now. And since things are restarting after COVID, they're hoping that they can have some win-win cooperation with China. And I think that President Macron has a good chance of helping them, because President Macron, unlike the EU's position, he's kind of a maverick and an independent. And he does things in a French way. The French have always had this independent streak. So I think that actually helps them to do business. And I believe that it'll be a good shot in the arm for both China and for France if some of these deals get done.
Do we have Carl back? Okay, Zhongping again here. You know, the Chinese ambassador to the European Union said that, in terms of the importance of the bilateral relationship, he said that, the way Beijing and Brussels manage their relations will, to a very large extent, determine the future of the world. I wonder what's your interpretation to that remarks?
Okay, I agree actually with that remark. I think the importance of China-European relations, including China's relations with France, Germany, and member states of Europe, it's not only matters relations between our two sides, because it matters about a big powers relations, it matters about the global development and global security. Number one, first, European Union is it's a global economic power. We couldn't think about just the one member states. They have a big single market, and the European Union, United States, China are the three biggest economic powers in the world. So economically, if China and Europe could work together, it will make sure the stability of the world economic situation. Secondly, China and Europe want to do something in terms of global governance, jointly addressing climate change issues, for example. Also, energy transition, this is the key words, both in China and in Europe. So energy transition and digital transition, if you like, in Europe they call double transitions. Gray transitions we call energy transitions, and also digital transitions. These are very important issues, not only for China, but also for Europe, but also for the whole world. So, and you mentioned the, Ukraine crisis. Ukraine crisis is the biggest issue in the world now. Both China and Europe would very much like to do something together. So if we could stable the world in terms of economic development, in terms of security, it's great for the whole world. Qingduo.
Harvey, back to you. I want to have your opinion on this relationship and its importance to the international world. Let's say to the international community in terms of peace and development. Yes, we have a lot of challenges. For example, climate change, banking crisis, inflation, Ukraine crisis. But at the same time, probably, scholars are suggesting we should have a long-term vision into the future about the role to be played by China and the European Union to stabilize the situation, to bring all countries together, to work for the best interests of the entire world. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Xinduo. As I see it, we're involved here in a global trilateral model. You've got the U.S. and China, let's say, on each side of each other, and in between you have the new political entity called the European Union. And I believe that the European Union is actually the fulcrum or the future balancing point between the U.S. and China, and can help facilitate to solve some of the problems that are coming about. Now, I find it very amusing that a subtext of the meeting is about EU strategic independence from the U.S. If you look at the U.S. media carefully, they're falsely accusing the countries of having an opportunity. They're seeing this as an opportunity, this meeting of EU and China, for China to drive a wedge between China and the EU. But it's not about that at all. That's completely wrong. That while the EU and U.S. interests do converge on many issues, they don't align 100%. And the realignment is changing over time. So you take the U.S. attempt of using these long-arm regulations to drive a stake through the heart of Chinese tech leaders like Huawei by denying them advanced technologies such as microchips fabbed in the Netherlands and Japan. So rather than competing fairly, it's no wonder that many EU countries and others are bristling at U.S. arrogance. But they're at the moment they're going along to a large extent. But the EU is in a position to exercise its strategic autonomy. And I believe in the days, years, and decades to come, the EU is going to do exactly that. And that's why they're as important, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Well, Carl, the Chinese ambassador Fu Cun to the EU said, the biggest risk for the China-EU relationship is weaponizing trade issues for geopolitical or even ideological purposes. How bad can it be if trade issues were really weaponized for geopolitical, ideological purposes here?
Well, unfortunately, I think we have been seeing that. Especially between the U.S. and China, since it seems that the only thing that the Republicans and Democrats can agree on is to be against China at the moment, and that pushes more of that. Actions to sort of discriminate some against China, both on the part of the EU and the U.S., for example, in the chips that were mentioned previously, are actually causing simply, understandably, China to feel that they need to develop more ability to do things on their own and produce their own chips. And this is not efficient. China is specializing in producing historically sort of lower end chips for simpler devices. The US and countries like South Korea are producing more advanced chips. And actually, the U.S. imports a lot of chips from China, and China imports a lot of chips from the U.S. It's just of different types. As Michael Porter, the famous Harvard professor, tells us, it's not that there's one best industry or one best part of an industry to be in, but depending on the resources and capabilities a particular country has, countries should specialize in different segments of an industry. And in addition, China, of course, has much of the world's supply of some raw special metals that are needed in production of chips. If they would ever decide to put an embargo on those going to the EU and the US, those countries would be in big trouble. But fortunately, China has shown that they want to be open to free trade and have not done that. And that's rather ironic since, in most of history, we've seen the U.S. being the leaders of pushing free trade forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, Carl, of course, along with van der Leyen, the EU Commission President, is the French delegation, French President Macron. So tell us, what's to expect in terms of China-French, probably more deals, more cooperation in terms of trade and investment?
So I think at the moment, the fact that relations are not ideal, unfortunately, between China and the U.S. gives a great opportunity for Europe to make closer relations with China and France to make closer relations with China. What I'm really hoping might happen is that there might be discussions restarting about the EU-China comprehensive agreement on investment, or CAI as it's often called, which was all but approved at the end of 2020, but has more or less been frozen since then. I'm not overly optimistic that this is going to be happening instantly, but hopefully we can make some steps towards that. And that would have been a great agreement for the European Union, because it gave much greater access to a variety of industries in China. It also gave greater protection in terms of intellectual property. And it helped Chinese companies to have more fair and open access to Europe. So I hope that we might see beginnings of some talking along that. But I think the most important thing is that these leaders are meeting. With the pandemic, most people haven't been meeting that much in person for a long time. You and I were at Bao Forum last week, and it was great that many people could meet in person again. And I hope that these government leaders meeting will help build a relationship to make it easier to smooth over difficulties moving forward. Finally, I should mention that I think the real opportunity that should be focused on first is the opportunity of different green technologies. I think that this is something that the EU, particularly France, and China can surely agree on. And for that matter, Norway, a country where I'm based now, is a real leader in green technologies. And so there are lots of different players that can come together. We all have to work together on that. And I should point out that one of the policies that I think China's had, which has had the most positive effects, has been the Belt and Road Initiative, which is now celebrating, of course, its 10th anniversary. And while initially it was sort of, what can we do to help other countries and what can we do to help Chinese companies go abroad, it's really exciting that there's now this part that is the Green Belt and Road, which is paying attention to doing things, in an environmental friendly way. And we've seen China helping, countries along this, such as Thailand and energy improvement, and, for example, in Africa, Ethiopia with a light train network. So I hope that we'll see China continuing to put more focus on this Green Belt and Road. Because at the moment it's still a small part of the activity of the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think that indeed France has a lot to offer there. In fact, among the more than 50 leaders that are coming along in the delegation are some leaders of some leading French energy companies. So hopefully they can have some positive discussions in that area.
Well, thank you, Carl. So coming up next, we'll take a close look at the indictment against the former U.S. President Donald Trump. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. Well, former U.S. President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to charges involving illegal hush money payments to an adult film star in 2016 ahead of his then presidential bid. A Manhattan District Court has charged Trump with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree, making Trump the first former U.S. president to ever be criminally charged. So what's going to happen to the former president? Can Trump still run for or even be elected U.S. president? And how will this legal process impact the presidential election next year? So Harvey, first of all, tell us, Trump has appeared in court. What do you make of his appearance, first appearance in court?
Well, I make of it that he's very worried. You could see from his demeanor and his rambling speech afterwards when he got back to Mar-a-Lago that he's very worried. Because for years, for decades, Trump has evaded the law. He used to have a lawyer who taught him how to do this, who's named Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was the person who helped Senator McCarthy engineer the Red Scare in the 1950s. And Roy Cohn is the person who taught Donald Trump to evade the law, both as a businessman and, even though he's now dead, as a president. So I think that he can feel the hot breath of the law breathing down his throat and his back. And I think that you could see from Manhattan's welcome of Trump that most of the people who were outside the courthouse were anti-Trump, that the couple people who came, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the lying congressman, were drowned out by the rest of the crowd. So I think that while there's a partisan element, I think the wheels of justice are turning, and they're turning in the direction of Donald Trump. And I believe with all the cases that will be coming up, he's going to be in court for most of the rest of his life. And this will have personal consequences for him and also systemic consequences for the United States of America as well.
Mm-hmm. Harvey, people will ask, these issues or the hush money, hush, payments happened years ago. Why the legal case now?
Well, part of it is that the wheels of justice turn very slowly generally. And in this case, they turn even more slowly because it's the first case against a sitting U.S. president. So the prosecutors involved want to have the strongest possible case. And so that's why it's taking such a long time. And it's taking even longer in the other cases in Georgia and on the federal level, as well as another case in New York. So the stakes are high, and nobody wants to ruin the democracy as such as it is in the process.
So Carl, if you look at the politics in the United States, in terms of this legal case, even moderate Republicans, speaking of them rallying behind Trump, like Mitt Romney, who voted actually for the impeachment against Trump twice, when Trump was the president. He criticized the charges. He talked about this political agenda or political persecution there. What do you make of that?
So first, I'm really happy to see that the charges are coming forward now. I think it's a real testament to the U.S. System that regardless of who you are, that charges come forward. If they're deemed to be worthy of that. I think some of the Republican criticizing of the charges coming forward is that it has been a while. We're talking about something that happened in 2016, but of course. As was mentioned, really the prosecutors wanted to make sure everything was absolutely tight, and I really do respect that and think that is correct. And I hope moving forward, lots of effort will continue to be placed to make sure that this is not too partisan. But I think this is the fact that it's sort of happening now, and also the fact that these are not the biggest charges. Trump has, arguably larger charges in some of the other cases. And so some people say, well, is it really worth it for a president? But I think it is. We need to show that everyone is treated fairly. And I think the interesting question will be, how does this affect Trump in his bid to be the president again? It doesn't look like the Constitution prevents a president who is, or a candidate for president who has been either indicted or convicted from running. That's not one of the three criteria, which are just that you're a U.S. citizen, have lived in the U.S. for at least 14 years or at least 35 years of age as well. So he still could run. And I think it's a little bit of an open question. I think some extremists in the Republican Party really rally much more behind him now, so gain some support there. But I think we'll see some moderates, feeling that this could help them to move away from him.
Mm-hmm. As a Chinese, observer, Zhong Ping, as an outsider, how do you see this legal case against this is the first time there are charges against a former U.S. president, and also, of course, related politics between the two parties, Democrats and Republicans?
Okay, Chindo, what I can tell you is many Europeans would be very carefully watch it about this case. People who I met from Europe told me they were very much scared about the returning of Trump into the White House again. So they would be very carefully watch this case. They would very much do not like to say Trump to come back to become the president of the United States again, because they think this will be a disaster for the United States, for transatlantic relations, and for the whole world. Chindo.
Mm-hmm. Well, Harvey, as you said, Trump probably will spend a lot of time in court. But what about the likelihood, like he will, probably be put into prison, standing behind the bars?
I think if he's treated like any other American citizen who's not a president, presidents, when they're serving, get a pass on many things. But I think if he's like other citizens, that there's a high probability that he'll have to go to court. If he does have to go to court and go to prison. If he doesn't go to prison, it's because he will try to delay, as he always does, with appeals and more appeals, and that those court cases may, in the sense, outlive him, and when he dies, the court cases die as well. But I think there's an excellent chance that he'll be convicted, he'll be fined, he could be imprisoned, and it's right that he could run for re-election as president. But what's not settled at all is if he wins the presidency, nobody expected him to win the last time, and nobody expects him, I think, to win now. It's unlikely. But if he wins, it's an open question whether somebody who's been convicted of a felony can serve as president. And this is something that's going to keep legal scholars and the Department of Justice busy, and is probably keeping them busy today at this very moment.
Mm-hmm. You earlier mentioned about, there are consequences, for this case in terms of probably the election, in terms of the politics of this nation. Tell us more about that.
Okay, well, I think it's a two-edged sword. In one hand, that the fact that he's been indicted has helped Trump, because people like Mitt Romney, who I'm disappointed in because I thought he's quite a moral person, that these people are rallying behind Trump, and it's purely political. And in fact, Trump's supporters are showering him with millions of dollars in money for defense. And I think the number now must be close to or exceeding 10 million. So I think on one side, it's helping Trump, and it's removing a lot of the opposition, even if Trump gets convicted in the case during the presidential election campaign. But I think it also helps the Democrats, because most of the Democrats do not like Trump, and most of the independent voters do not like him either, especially the important demographic of suburban housewives. So Trump may, in fact, be able to get nominated, but I think he's really hurt his chances a lot by doing the things that he's alleged to have done from getting elected as president. I don't think it's going to happen, but as we've seen before, anything's possible.
Mm-hmm. Briefly, Carl, if you look at the opinion polls, for example, related to this case, you would see like 80% of the Republicans, they are behind Trump, and 80% of Democrats, they are obviously, supporting the case. Some people say this will probably serve to create even deeper partisan divides in the nation. What's your opinion on that?
I think at the extremes it will, but I think in the moderate levels, it will probably bring more people towards the Democrat and towards more moderate Republican candidates. But I think it's really hard to predict exactly what is going to happen. But I do agree that I think that in the short term, Trump will get a little boost. But in the long term, this is really going to hurt his chances if he becomes the Republican candidate to become president.
Mm-hmm. But he, as the first president or former president, to be charged or being charged, some say that's itself, has probably created some dent for the reputation for the United States.
Well, I would say it's a good thing. It's a good thing because it shows that everyone's treated equally in the U.S. I actually am an American citizen as well as a Swedish citizen, grew up in the U.S., and I'm actually quite happy about it. I think it shows that democracy is alive and well after some years of some challenge in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, we conclude today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.